This week on To the Contrary.
First, progress or not for women on the sexual assault front in 2014. Then, what do companies owe pregnant women on the job? Behind the headlines, are teens really oversexed?
Hello, I'm Bonnie Urbay. Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, sexual assault. Are rape and other forms of violence against women starting to be taken more seriously? Commentators say the NFL's swift reaction to the newest case of player misconduct is a good sign. The San Francisco NFL team is releasing Ray McDonald after he was identified as a suspect in a sexual assault case. This is a turnaround for the NFL, which was pilloried for its dithering response to Ray Rice's domestic abuse charge and did not act upon an earlier accusation against McDonald himself. There's been a lot of change this year on the issue of campus rape. The White House launched the first ever task force on stopping rape on campus, and the University of Virginia revised its policy after a Rolling Stone article that recounted one student's rape became national news. New questions keep coming up about the veracity of that alleged rape victim's story. Feminists are worried the ensuing controversy will have a chilling effect on projects aimed at fighting sexual assault. So, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeever, was 2014 a year of progress for women and girls on the issue of domestic violence and rape?
Well, I think definitely from Kirsten Gillibrand's work in terms of raising awareness in the military to the whole debacle with Ray Rice. We've certainly raised awareness, but we still have a long way to go.
I think this was a year that called attention to the fact that a serious crime deserves a more serious conversation.
Oh, absolutely. The level of awareness now on the issue and the fact that the universities and the government and the NFL is acting is an illustration that we are definitely making progress.
Particularly since the White House got involved in this issue, I think that's major progress. And I would have to say that progress has been made, notwithstanding the Rolling Stone article, which I do think completely and totally undermined this issue.
All right, let's start with that, even though I was going to start with the NFL, but it came out this week. CNN and probably other outlets did interviews with two of the friends of the girl, and they basically, other than that she looked very shaken when she came to them, she was not beaten up, she made up a lot of the details. The last time we talked about this on the show, Rolling Stone had just pulled out on her, but the more details come out, the worse it looks for her. Tell me about how badly this will impact the fight against rape on campus.
Well, I do think that the way that the Rolling Stone handled the article made the issue, I guess I have a big problem with it as a journalist. I guess I'll start from there. Because as a journalist, I think that they should have done a better job verifying the facts. I'm not saying that she's wrong. I'm not saying that this didn't happen. I'm saying that they did a bad job, and now it looks like she's a liar, and it completely undercut her, and it undercut the issue of campus assault.
Anybody else have strong feelings one way or the other?
Well, she's exactly right.
So I'm so mad that I'm like hopping mad, and I can't even verbalize it because I'm so mad. Sorry.
Exactly right. And I think about the poor lady in Columbia, the young student in Columbia, who is dragging around a mattress everywhere she goes just to sort of visualize and make sure that people don't forget that she was assaulted on campus and next to nothing. Actually, nothing happened to the people that assaulted her. So, you know, this is a real issue that women across the country are having to face. And so it's very unfortunate that because journalists didn't do their job, their accusations might not be taken as seriously.
Yeah, but do you think long term, because of the UVA retraction and this woman's, doubts about her credibility, is that really going to hurt going after sexual assault on campus when you have a White House effort to do so?
I hope it's a wake-up call. I hope it's a wake-up call for responsibility of all parties involved here. responsibility on the part of journalists to really be serious, responsibility on the part of schools who have policies that are inadequate and they're not turning these cases over to the criminal justice system for appropriate prosecution, responsibility of young men and young women to make sure that they are above reproach in their own behavior and bringing allegations that are serious and well-founded, not crying wolf. That's a very, you endanger others if that's the case.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And, it's a very complex issue. And, what happened with the Rolling Stone magazine is an aspect of it. How journalists should be covering, what standards they should be using. The other big part of the story is the universities that did not have a process in place, that were not creating awareness, that were not taking the cases seriously, like the one in Columbia University. So, to say one thing will shadow the progress we made in others, I think is too simplistic. I think we're moving forward. I don't see a way back.
In terms of moving forward, why don't colleges just say, thank you for reporting this to us. It's actually a criminal act. Go to the cops right now.
I totally agree with you.
Get a rape test done so they have a DNA on file. It's not something you come to us about. It's something you go to the police about.
Bonnie, I totally agree with you. I remember when I was going to college, that happened to me, but my recollection of when I thought anything would happen to my friends is that we would go to the police. So this whole dynamic of going to college and then not reporting it is something that was news to me when I started reading about it.
And how about, let's switch to tolerance of domestic violence by not just NFL players, any kind of professional sports players, men, period. Did we make progress?
Well, I think we're trying to. It's interesting to see.
And women, by the way. I mean, there's a small percentage of domestic violence that is perpetrated by women.
And in same-sex relationships as well. I mean, this is unfortunately something that almost everyone in every demographic deals with. I think that really what happened with the NFL has really gone a long way towards raising awareness toward this. Roger Goodell, I think, really understood that what happened initially was a bad thing. It really put him on notice that it's a serious issue, and I think that it's something that's not only raised his awareness, but as a nation, we said that we want to address this a little bit better.
What about domestic violence as it pertains to children, like beating your child with a stick, your 4-year-old with a stick? Are we making progress? Have we raised awareness? Will there be less tolerance of that sort of behavior?
I think we need to be clear. We are not engaging the full range of issues that are related to domestic violence. And I think we need to concentrate more on the fact that marriage is an antidote to that. Cohabitation, serial live-in boyfriends, these are things that put children at risk, and we are not yet talking enough about that aspect.
Do we have data? That's an interesting point. Are there data that show that the child's more likely to be beaten by a live-in as opposed to a married spouse?
Yeah, marriage is a safer place for children and for women and for men, for that matter.
And I wonder, too, the U.S. has 59 nations have signed, starting with Sweden, which started the whole thing, about making it a crime to beat a child. 59 nations have signed onto a UN treaty that the rights of the child, making it illegal in the country that signs on board to beat children. We're not one of them.
Well, the United States doesn't sign any treaty, so I mean, the United States don't sign nothing to say about the treaty. We just don't sign any treaty, and this is a shame. And an interesting thing about the fact is that the United States sometimes is quite a leader in many of these policies and these issues. They just don't sign the treaty. But I totally agree with you. I want to make a point about domestic violence, particularly as pertaining to children and also women, is alcohol and substance abuse. I mean, that's a major factor, and that's something that we also need to deal with, and the linkage between substance abuse, particularly alcoholism. And I talked about that because in the Latino community it's a huge problem.
And on college campuses, unfortunately, too. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay. From sexual assault to pregnancy discrimination.
For the second time this year, Walmart faces charges it fails to make accommodations for pregnant workers. The superstore changed its policies to provide, quote, reasonable accommodations for pregnant workers with temporary disabilities after the first claim. But a new EEOC charge says managers did not go far enough. The charge was filed on behalf of an employee whose job included cleaning bathrooms. She was denied a request for temporary relief from those duties duties after she said the chemicals were making her ill. She was later fired after calling in sick several times. The Supreme Court is currently deciding a case, Young v. United Parcel Service, which addresses the scope of the 1978 Pregnancy Discrimination Act.
So do you believe, Jennifer Marshall, under that act that pregnant women have a right to request lighter duties, shall we say, or different duties while they're pregnant?
They certainly should have that freedom and opportunity, and Congress should do whatever we need to make sure there aren't any barriers to businesses, organizations having the flexibility to meet those requests. In the case of Walmart, they may not have been providing enough flexibility to pregnant women on the job, and it's good that they changed their policy in March as a result to make sure that expecting mothers could have better, easier access to lighter duty jobs.
Bonnie, I thought the stories were unbelievable, and they were unbelievable in the sense that why should we be having this discussion? It was so obvious what they needed to do. And in some ways, the companies are complaining, and UPS is another company that had a similar case saying, oh, we don't want the law, we don't want the regulations, we don't want the Supreme Court to rule. But if you don't do the right thing, of course, as a nation, we're going to need laws, because look what they're doing. It was so basic. She had a medical note saying it was a case that she was cleaning the bathrooms and the detergents chemicals were causing her to react negatively. She's a pregnant woman. All you needed to do was to change the job that she was doing, and it was so simple. And I don't understand why we need a law for them to do that.
Well, here's what stands out for me. Is the issue that there were other jobs that were open, like cashier jobs, that she could have been doing. Now, I could understand if a business just didn't have any other job available at all that was lighter duty, and so they had to say, I'm sorry, you're going to have to take, paid leave because we just don't need another greeter sitting at the front door. I'm sorry. But there were cashier jobs open that she could have had, so that was the thing that just baffled me.
Yeah, and what she wouldn't take it, or they wouldn't offer it to her?
She wanted to go to a cashier job or something else. She actually applied for other jobs in the store that were lighter duty, and they did not give them to her, and that was what I was saying was baffling to me, why they wouldn't just move her to one of those lighter duty jobs.
But let me ask you this. First of all, what you said about the chemicals, if they're making a pregnant woman sick, they're probably making non-pregnant workers sick as well if they're toxic, so they ought to just be banned from the workplace. I wouldn't use them in my house. But on the other hand, how far do companies have to go to accommodate pregnant women? And if the rules are very strict, like, oh, you have to do anything she wants, is that going to hurt women in terms of costing them jobs because employers can't afford those accommodations?
I think that these were not unreasonable requests. In fact, this particular case happened after Walmart changed their policy. And specifically, this particular store refused to bend at all. And that's why this woman was exposed to these chemicals. She wasn't asking for much. She just said, I can do something else in the store. If you've ever been into a Walmart, there are probably 50 million things you can do in Walmart. But they refused to give her that on a regular basis. So really, we have to change a culture that says that we don't want to even bend a little bit, to recognize the quality and the sanctity of life that women are carrying when they're pregnant, and to put them in a position where they might have some sort of negative reaction to themselves or to the child that they're carrying.
I bet you like
I like hearing
for the
sanctity of
record,
life.
pro-abortion groups and pro-life and pro-choice, they're all together on this case. All women's groups are coming together.
You pointed to the fact that one size fits all could end up not helping women in the long run, and that's why I think we need to be careful to allow these companies flexibility. In the UPS case, it was actually some union rules about giving light duty preferential to seniority, and it was seniority problems that came up in the Young situation. So things can get in the way of allowing, and in this case, union contract details got in the way of them accommodating the pregnant woman's request.
Well, that's exactly the concern that I was trying to vocalize. In this situation, there were other jobs that she could have done, but certainly more stringent rules that would require businesses to give them lighter duty, I think would also be unfair. Because again, what if a business just doesn't have any lighter duty jobs available? Should they be required to create new positions for pregnant women who so that they can work during that time? I think that starts to cross a line in terms of dictating what businesses would have to do, and I think it would lead to a situation, as you said, where you wouldn't want to hire as many women who could potentially get pregnant.
So where do you draw that line? Because, for example, I used to work at a company many years ago where the first woman in the newsroom to get pregnant and take paid maternity leave, which they offered at 6 months, and then quit the day after her paid maternity leave was up. In other words, she took it probably knowing all along she wasn't coming back.
Right.
Those sorts of things do hurt other women on the job. So where do you draw a line that prevents those kinds of things?
Well, I think that's a good point, and you bring in the larger issue, right? This isn't just about Walmart or UPS or part-time jobs. This is about women in all workplaces, and where workplaces draw the line to being flexible, but also doing what they think is best for the business without being inhumane.
I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, all of these companies have rules in place in terms of what happens to an individual if they're injured on the job, for example. In those situations, they switch them over to another responsibility that is not as stringent. Why can't they do the very same thing for women?
It's not a business's responsibility that a woman
But
got
if it's
pregnant.
already in place, well, what are we trying to say then as a nation? We're trying to say that women shouldn't get pregnant? She should have a right to get pregnant. And if they already have rules in place to take care of situations where someone is hurt on a job and they can adjust their duties, they can do it for women when that's a temporary issue as well.
So you're saying anything that applies to any kind of workplace disability should just apply to pregnant women, but no more than that.
Exactly.
Exactly. And the other criteria you will have, Bonnie, is the size of the business. You know, the laws don't apply to every business. There's a certain 50 employees, 100 employees. So I think there's a lot of precedent to handle these kinds of issues.
But perhaps you should require them to stay a certain amount of time after taking that maternity leave, to speak to your other point.
Or pay it back.
Or have some sort of rule that, pay it back so that this doesn't happen and hurt other women. I do think that there should be rules.
All right, behind the headlines. Is society set on believing the worst about young people? Researcher Kathleen Bogle says yes. She told us in her new book, Kids Gone Wild, is an attempt to set the record straight about the narrative of the oversexed teen.
It's so interesting at the very same time that these headlines are running saying youth are crazier than ever, they've gone wild, parents beware. The behavior is actually a little more conservative than their own parents were.
Bogle says many of the headlines and stories are urban legends. One example is the myth of sex bracelets. Kids as young as those in elementary school were said to be wearing different colored gel bracelets to represent sex acts they had committed or were willing to do if the bracelet was broken off their wrist.
What we can tell you is that there's no real proof that it did happen. There's a lot of proof that it has the signs of urban legends where they keep kind of saying it's a friend of a friend of a friend, or it's happening in a different part of the country, or it's happening in a different country entirely. So it has all those signs of it. It should sound a little far-fetched to people, but because there's so much hype about young people, it feeds right into it. It feeds right into, hey, this is what's going on.
In Kids Gone Wild, Bogle and her co-author blame the media and the internet for spreading sensational stories about teens and sex, despite the lack of credible evidence. Even when guests debate the legitimacy of these stories, viewers are left with a negative impression of teenagers.
When you think about these morning shows, they've got a couple of hours to fill every single day. So the stories are parents beware, you may want to have your children leave the room, put the earplugs in, this is really going to upset you.
If you're the parent of a teenage girl, you may want to sit down right about now.
For parents, it feeds into their fears that, people are trying to contaminate their kid, they're trying to corrupt their kid.
To the contrary, the data show teens are more cautious today. In the past 10 years, teen pregnancy, teen birth, and abortion rates have declined.
If you look at, for example, what % of high school students were sexually active in 1991, and you compare that to 20 years later, you see about a 7% point drop. So about 54% were sexually active in the early 90s, and you see now it dipped below 50%, so it's less than half. Even if young people were more sexually active than ever, which the research shows they're not, does that mean they're willing to do anything with anyone, anywhere?
One scary teen activity is real: sexting. But Bogle says it's not nearly as prevalent as the barrage of headlines would have you believe.
The sexting thing is real in terms of it's happening. It's not just an urban legend. There's debate about how common it is. The number that got floated around a lot was that 20% of teens had done that, but that was not a representative study, and it included people that were over age 18. There have been horrific cases of sexting gone wrong where there was a suicide. There are upsetting things that happen, but it doesn't help us to have this distorted, hyped version of things and be making decisions based on that.
Vogel wants parents to understand stories about out-of-control teens have been exaggerated. She says they take on lives of their own and are difficult to snuff out. But she's more concerned about their influence on public policy.
Having a over-the-top hyped version of things makes for poor policy decisions. Next thing you know, we say, let's register these 16-year-olds as sex offenders. Some things have even ended up in court cases with the ACLU involved. We're making policy decisions and talking about young people based on something that's false.
So, Patricia Sosa, we should say you have devoted much of your career to fighting one kind of bad behavior, particularly among teens, smoking. Is this a case of blaming the media? Are the media really at fault for this?
As a mother of a 15-year-old girl that lives through this, I think my daughter will love this segment because I'm constantly telling her to be cautious, giving her all sorts of advice about sex and alcohol and drugs, and she thinks I'm exaggerating what's out there, that she's a good kid, that she's really not doing this. I do want to create an environment that is a positive environment for her. So, yes, maybe the media didn't exaggerate so much, I wouldn't be such a dramatic mother, according to my daughter.
Have you already changed my thing, my cry to say media bad guy? Everyone's staring at me. But, I actually am in the correct age range for the acts that they're talking about, and I have never heard of any of these things. I was in middle school,
you never
high
heard
school.
of sexting?
No, not sexting. Okay, everybody's heard of sexting. I've heard of sexting. But I mean the parties that they're talking about with the wristbands and all this crazy stuff that the kids are doing these days. I was in middle school and high school at the height of all of the stuff that's in this book, and I had never heard of any of it beyond the sexting. So I assure you, kids are not into these things these days. I promise. Never heard of it.
It's about titillating TV. That's really what it is.
It's about drawing numbers, and you only do that by, huge crashes or plane crashes or explosions or telling parents, you better be aware of this, you better hear about this. It's going to hurt you if you don't listen.
Because we all want to think that our kids are acting a whole lot worse than we ever did.
But the reality at base of this is that there are a lot of risks out there today, and young people are being exposed to them very early. So the good news is that when you talk to your teenagers about those risks and about the consequences of engaging in some behaviors, they're going to have better outcomes on aggregate. That's what the data tell us. And so it's one thing, it's very interesting to look at this and see if there's a study that would say whether the cautionary tales that parents have heard have made them engage more with their teens, and that's affected behavior.
But what's a very interesting sort of double entendre here is while we talked in the beginning of the show about raising awareness of domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, here we're talking about too much media awareness. And the fact is, on rape and campus rape and sexual assault, when I was growing up in the 70s, I had no idea there was this much domestic violence and rape going on. So I always wonder, was it really going on? Or have the media just done a better job now of talking about it? Which is it? Any ideas?
About the domestic violence? Absolutely.
And
I think the media is done a better job. A lot of people have made a better job in terms of rapes and particularly what's happening in college campuses. But I think here is an extreme. This is like the opposite, that they've done a bad job in the sense that they're creating a negative environment in which the kids are feel paranoid. My daughter is like, why are you accusing me of this? I don't do any of this.
Well, first of all, I actually hope that the media is overhyping the amount of rape and sexual assault that happens on campuses. My God, if 1 in 5 people are actually sexually assaulted on campus, I just can't even imagine. So I hope that that's an overhyped number. But as far as raising awareness on what's going on with these parties and what the kids are into these days, I do think it runs a risk of making kids shut off their minds and shut off their ears because it sounds so ridiculous and just not hearing what they do need to hear about that information.
Is there a possibility of child shutdown because of too much media
I definitely
noise?
think so. I mean, first of all, as the mother of a teenager, you kind of know they don't listen to half of what you say
Exactly.
anyway.
That's
like
not teenagers.
That's been going around.
That's not new. But, I do think when you continue to sort of bombard them with if information that they know is kind of ridiculous, you've got to kind of lose your credibility a little bit.
All right. That's it for this edition of To the Contrary. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/To the Contrary. And happy holidays to everybody. Whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.